It's Friday, May 1st, and you're listening to Uptown Radio.
The findings of our comprehensive, independent investigation, coupled with the medical...
Whole street! Whole street! Whole street! Whole street! Whole street! Whole street! Whole street!
The manner of death, deemed a homicide by the Maryland State Medical Examiner, is believed to be the result of a fatal injury that occurred while Mr. Gray was unrestrained by a seatbelt in the...
What's been interesting is that my sons have been on the ground with me, and I have written an op-ed for the Baltimore Sun.
Minutes of NPR.
You're going to be fine. It's Friday, May 1st, and you're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Chava Garari.
And I'm Kimi Von Cannell. In Baltimore, charges in the death of Freddie Gray.
The medical examiner's determination that Mr. Gray's death was a homicide has led us to believe that we have probable cause to file criminal charges.
A Baltimore mother teaches her sons to peacefully protest.
We look at alternative treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder, one therapy that benefits some veterans working with horses.
The horse can pick up on angst or whatever is going on. The horse really does pick up on that.
Visitors waited in line for hours to get into the Whitney Museum of American Art. The museum reopened today in a new downtown space.
In the world of art, I don't know. It's just a beautiful thing. I'm excited.
Also in this hour, cyber criminals threaten the healthcare industry, and street vendors struggle to get legal permits. But first, this news.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Winsor Johnston. Hundreds of people are crowding the streets of Baltimore, cheering today's decision to charge 6 police officers in the death of Freddie Gray. The charges include second-degree murder, manslaughter, and assault. The 25-year-old suffered and later died from a severe spinal injury after being taken into police custody. Baltimore State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby says Gray had asked for medical attention several times during a ride between the site of his arrest and a police booking center.
Mr. Gray suffered a severe and critical neck injury as a result of being handcuffed, shackled by his feet, and unrestrained inside of the BPD wagon.
The Baltimore Police Union says the officers took appropriate action and are not responsible for Gray's death. President Obama says his administration will get to the bottom of what happened. The American Civil Liberties Union of California has released a smartphone app that will automatically send video recordings of possible police misconduct directly to its servers. As NPR's Richard Gonzalez reports, the app is designed to prevent such recordings from being seized or erased.
The app is called Mobile Justice CA, and it comes as video surface of violent interactions between law enforcement and young African-American men. In addition to preserving videos, the app can be used to alert others of the location of a controversial incident. Peter Biebering is an attorney for the ACLU of Southern California.
The app will allow the ACLU and the community groups we're working with
to take the video public and to take the heat off the individuals who have recorded it.
The free mobile app is similar to ones launched by the ACLU in at least 5 other states. Richard Gonzalez, NPR News, San Francisco.
The Pentagon says sexual assault in the U.S. military has declined over the past 2 years. As NPR's Jackie Northam reports, the Pentagon said the number of service personnel who reported an incident went up 70% over the past 2 years.
In its annual report on sexual assault, the Pentagon found that the number of incidents had dropped more than 25% over the past 2 years. Still, more than 10,000 men and 8,500 women in the U.S. military were sexually assaulted last year. The report says men who were assaulted were more likely than women to experience multiple incidents in the past year, but describe it as a hazing intended to humiliate them rather than a sexual act. The Pentagon has been under pressure recently over its handling of sexual assault after several high-profile cases. This report says the Defense Department now offers more medical, psychological, and legal assistance to victims than any other jurisdiction in the country. Jackie Northam, NPR News, Washington.
Stop. Higher on Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 183 points. The Nasdaq Composite up 62. The S&P 500 up 21. This is NPR.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Miriam Sitz. A former Port Authority official and ally of Governor Chris Christie pleaded guilty today to charges related to the 2013 George Washington Bridge closure. David Wildstein admitted to committing fraud and conspiracy. 2 others were also indicted, the Port Authority's former Deputy Executive Director William Baroni and former Christie aide Bridget Ann Kelly. According to the indictment, the lane closures were in retribution for the Fort Lee mayor not endorsing Christie's re-election bid. U.S. District Attorney Paul Fishman says Wildstein and his conspirators intentionally caused mass disruption.
They chose not to execute the plan during mid-August, which is traditionally a light month for traffic. Instead, they deliberately waited until Monday, September 9th, which they knew was the first day of school in Fort Lee, to further ratchet up the injury to Fort Lee's residents.
In response to the charges filed today in Baltimore against 6 police officers in the death of 25-year-old Freddie Gray last month, protesters gathered in Union Square, planning to march later this afternoon to Foley Square in Lower Manhattan. The Whitney Museum reopened today at its new Meatpacking District location. Museum Director Alex Weinberg.
This beautiful and functional new building was conceived to primarily provide artists with aspirational spaces to imagine what they could possibly do here.
Tomorrow, the museum will host a free block party with performances starting at 11 a.m. The singer Ben E. Keith died yesterday in Hackensack, New Jersey. He was 76. King grew up in Harlem and sang at the Apollo Theater in 1958 with a group that would become the Drifters. He helped write the single There Goes My Baby, and in 1961, he released the #1 single Stand By Me as a solo artist.
So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand.
Miriam Sitz, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Chava Garari.
And I'm Kimmy Von Cannell. As you heard earlier, police officers involved in the death of Freddie Gray are facing criminal charges. Baltimore's top prosecutor Marilyn Mosby made the announcement in a surprise move earlier today.
The findings of our comprehensive, independent investigation, coupled with the medical examiner's determination that Mr. Gray's death was a homicide, has led us to believe that we have probable cause to file criminal charges.
The 6 officers involved face a range of charges from misconduct to second-degree murder. Mosby said that Gray's death was a result of mistreatment during his arrest and failing to heed his calls for help. She provided new details about how the 25-year-old Gray died 2 weeks ago.
The manner of death, deemed a homicide by the Maryland State Medical Examiner, is believed to be the result of a fatal injury that occurred while Mr. Gray was unrestrained by a seatbelt in the custody of the Baltimore Police Department wagon.
Mosby also said police had no justification for arresting Gray and that the knife he'd been carrying was in fact legal.
The incident sparked protests nationwide, and in Baltimore, some turned violent. But following today's announcement, some demonstrators in Baltimore were celebrating.
As the reaction from the community continues to unfold, I spoke with one longtime Baltimore resident. Carsonia Wise-Whitehead is the author of Letters to My Black Sons, Raising Boys in a Post-Racial America. She's been protesting in Baltimore alongside her two sons, aged 12 and 14.
What's been interesting is that my sons have been on the ground with me. And I have written an op-ed for the Baltimore Sun, and I've also written a piece called Black Mommy Activism, which is really a humorous account of the things that I've been saying to my sons over the past 14 days that I never thought I would say. Like if pepper spray is used, close your eyes and bow your heads and use the milk and don't drink the milk, pour it in your eyes. And no, you can't go stand over there with that group just because you like the way they're dressed. Or as one son asked me, no, you can't go take a selfie with the National Guard. But that they are learning on the ground what true activism looks like, and they are being prepared to be leaders.
Does that necessarily mean that kids should be in the streets protesting?
If you think back to what was happening during the civil rights movement, people left college to get involved in the movement. When college students out in the front line, when that did not cause enough attention, then high school students went out there. When they needed more people, middle school students joined them. It went all the way down to a 4-year-old. Dick Gregory talks about a 4-year-old being in prison with him and Selma. So young people have been on the front lines of protests for as long as we can remember. So should students be out in the streets protesting? If you believe in change and you want to be a change agent, part of believing in change is you must work for change. I am not saying you should not be in school during the daytime, because you can always protest after that. And that is what they did.
You're a master professor in K-12 education, and you specialize in teaching our youth on how to tackle very complex issues like race, history, and identity. President Obama said recently that as a nation, we need to do some soul searching. How do you explain it to your kids and America's kids?
The train is already moving. This train of social justice and activism is already en route. And parents need to be talking to their children in real time about what is happening in our country and how they can be a part of this change. If your child is from a closed community, if your child is not a child of color and has never had these experiences, then it is on you to talk to them about that, to make them aware of what is happening to people who don't look like them and what is their responsibility.
So how would you describe the city that you know that you've lived in for 12 years to a complete stranger who has just been watching the news recently?
Well, Baltimore is an occupied city at this moment. You go to the Mondawmin Mall, there are armored trucks, there are National Guards, they have rifles. You go into low-income black communities across the city, you see the National Guard. You go down to Camden Yards, you see the National Guards. And then you go into predominantly middle-class, mostly white communities, there is no occupation. They are continuing on about their lives. As I asked one white woman when I was out in the community, I said, what do you think about the curfew? She said, look around you, what curfew? There were people out everywhere. So we are once again a tale of two cities under occupation.
Carsonia Wise-Whitehead teaches African American Studies at Loyola University in Maryland.
Security officials warn this could be the year we see more cybersecurity attacks in the healthcare sector.
In February, the health insurance provider Anthem announced that nearly 80 million medical records were compromised after its database was hacked.
Ariana Skybell reports the healthcare industry is behind the times when it comes to protecting its data.
Don Jackson is the director of threat intelligence with the cybercrime protection agency Fish Lab. He says the healthcare world is in the business of saving lives, not necessarily protecting data.
As an industry sector as a whole, security has not been a part of the culture.
The healthcare sector is made up of a network of players: doctors, insurance providers, hospital administrators. They exchange a lot of data, and there are a lot of ways to get at it.
The healthcare networks have enormous numbers of doors and windows, and very few people patrolling.
The guys after social security numbers are called black hat hackers. Jackson says if they manage to jimmy a lock or bust through a firewall, a treasure trove of information awaits.
And healthcare is one of those industries that has a very rich number of data fields and very rich information on an individual, usually all in one place. So rather than breaking into 3 different systems using triple the number of techniques, it's very attractive to be able to find all that information in one place.
Once our bad guy gets his hands on all that data, he can sell it on the black market for a pretty penny.
I just want to show you a few examples of how these records are sold.
Andre Krell is a cybersecurity detective. We're sitting in a conference room as he pulls up tabs on his computer. His screen is hidden by a tinted plexiglass sheet.
All right, so let's take the privacy screen off. Okay. So one of the forums that's very well known is called Pastabin. And here you actually can see literally the list and the pricing for the various data sets, right? So these are credit card numbers. So what hackers do, they chop them into the pieces. So you can buy the whole set, you can buy a subset.
So like right here it says ICC US fulls, $18. Is that a full record?
That would be a full record, correct.
So what kind of information goes into that?
Generally, that would include social security number, date of birth, maybe the driver's license, some of the relatives' information that could be bundled with it. So it's a whole package for that individual. So it might have an email, might have a credit card data for that individual. So for $18, you basically have complete lock on that person.
The good news is the law that governs the medical industry, known as HIPAA, now provides incentives for data encryption. The bad news, it's not required. When a breach happens, companies with encrypted data won't be fined and won't have to publicize it. Anthem did not encrypt its data, so it had to come clean and pay up. But this incentive is not always enough. Jackson at Fish Lab says companies are reluctant to encrypt because processing that data slows down transactions and can be a hassle. Sometimes it doesn't feel worth it.
If you're not required to encrypt any of that other information, you're probably not going to. It just doesn't make sense.
Some companies will encrypt select data, usually medical records, but that's not what cybercriminals are after.
They really don't care if you broke your toe or if you've been in drug treatment. They're really more after the personal information and the payment information.
And encryption isn't actually the ultimate safeguard. In the Anthem breach, cybercriminals sidestep those controls by gaining access to a privileged account, basically finding a key and slipping right through the back door. Aviva Leighton, a security analyst with the firm Gartner, says encryption wouldn't have helped.
Doesn't do you any good to encrypt data if the bad guy takes over an account that can read decrypted data. So certainly encryption's a good thing, but it's only one piece of the puzzle.
And if a black hat uses the backdoor approach, encryption does nothing. It's like wearing a life vest to run a marathon. But companies are still rewarded by HIPAA for wearing the life vest. They aren't required to tell their clients of the breach. And Jackson from Fish Lab says in some cases, they may not even know themselves.
So if somebody takes my doctor's paper file and steals it, you notice. The paper file's not there anymore. There's a big blank on the shelf. When someone steals data, they don't actually take it. Generally, they just make a copy, and there's no sign that it's been stolen.
When Anthem was breached, a staff member just happened to notice it. But Leighton says there is technology out there that can automatically detect these stealthier backdoor black hacks.
And that's been happening in the fraud world for years. Like your credit card company, sure you've gotten a call once in a while, someone's using your credit card in a strange way, and that's behavioral analytics.
Behavior analytics profiles normal user behavior and then compares all transactions to that original profile. Leighton says she has not seen this technique implemented in the healthcare world yet. Dale Nordenberg is the director of a medical safety and security consortium. He says there has been movement on this front.
There's clear policy evidence that the government is taking this seriously. Nearly every major department or agency in our government are all implementing programs around cybersecurity.
But outside of government, in the medical sector, implementation has been uneven. The National Institute of Standards and Technology issued a security framework meant to build on HIPAA's base guidelines. The American Medical Association has not laid out best practices, but the American Hospital Association has. Cybersecurity experts say best practices aren't much good if people aren't using them. Ariana Skybell, Columbia Radio News.
The Whitney Museum of American Art reopened today. The New York institution's move from the stately Upper East Side to the hip meatpacking district was highly anticipated.
Among those celebrating the reopening was First Lady Michelle Obama, who says she fell in love with the museum. Joe Sykes reports on the opening of a building that's already changing New York's landscape.
It's 15 years since Sex and the City's Samantha moved out of her rent-controlled apartment on the Upper East Side and down to the trendy meatpacking district.
Good morning, ladies. How you doing? Where whores were whores, men were women, and rents were much higher.
Since then, places like the High Line and the Standard Hotel have made the district New York's hottest property. And today, the Whitney Museum is following Samantha down to the meatpacking. Scott Christopher is first in line.
Today I got down here very early this morning. It's very important to go in and just bless this great museum. I brought my sketchbook, I brought my pastels. I'm actually going in creating.
Creating from a deep well of emotion, which you can hear when he talks.
Today, I don't know, in the world of art, I don't know. It's just a beautiful thing. Yeah, it's big.
Everything about the new Whitney is big. The building is 9 stories high with over 50,000 feet of interior exhibition space. It looks like a giant grey glass sail looming over the High Line in the old low-rise factories that were once the heart of New York's meat industry. But it's on the inside that the building comes alive. Last week I toured myself around the galleries. I started in the lobby and travelled in the industrial-sized elevators up to the 8th floor. And immediately you notice the light and the space. You go through the gallery, through the revolving doors, and you're out in the open, and suddenly you're sort of in the middle of New York. Back down on the ground floor, Adam Weinberg, the director of the Whitney, says the museum is
woven into the fabric of the city. The separation of indoors and outdoors is basically gone.
Gone because of that glass and the balconies that adorn every floor. And he says the Whitney fits down here.
The Upper East Side's lovely, but it's a much more fixed neighborhood. There's a sense here of possibility.
And it's that possibility that's got Scott Christopher hopping on his toes, waiting for the clock to tick round to 10:30 in the museum's opening. Suddenly, he's off. In he goes.
We made that first footstep. This is like super, this is big time. This is the first step on the moon for me.
Get in there.
Yeah.
Get in there.
Yay! Yeah! It's all happening. We all love art! Yay! Yay!
Christopher runs up the stairs and he's gone. If you want a taste of the excitement, the exhibition is free all Saturday. But be prepared for long lines. Joe Sykes, Columbia Radio News.
In the 80s, gentrification of the Lower East Side forced artists to move into the industrial neighborhoods of Williamsburg and Bushwick, across the bridge in Brooklyn.
3 decades later, these artists with underground identities have transformed the once high-crime and drug-dealing areas into thriving, lucrative communities. Nardos Mesmer reports.
Cheap rent and high crime. This is how we once thought of Bushwick and Williamsburg, the areas once associated with graffiti and vandalism. Now, the same neighborhoods have become trendy and accepting of this public art form that developed from bubble letters to full-scale murals known as street art. Artists like Norris Carlos Jefferson. He's worked as a street artist since he was a child and has seen the transition.
You know, they started out just tagging a name. They free advertising, just like to put your name out there. And then the next sort of transition to that would be to add some art to it, add an image to it. So then the characters, you do it like a character to go with your name. And then let me make my name in bubbles, because I don't want to just like do like the actual script or, you know, real quick. And then a character, and then before you know it, pieces.
Norris Carlos Jefferson, also known as N. Carlos J., has created major artworks for the Brooklyn Theater Art High School and Sweatshop. He recently curated an event showcasing the neighborhood's graffiti past. He called the show Brooklyn is the Future.
It's actually a brand that I created with my partner, Michael Peterson, to empower youth. When I say Brooklyn is the future, it's like you saying, hey, you know, my voice has to be heard, because I'm actually the future of this community, of where I'm at.
One of the artists who participated is Xavier El Mundo. He paints what he calls street art on canvas. I spoke to him at the Collage, a weekly event that he hosts on the rooftop of the DL restaurant where artists paint, dance, and network.
So if you were to teach me how to do something like this, how would you teach me? So the first thing that you painted was this robot right here.
Yeah, the woman robot, the spray cans and everything. And then we did the whole stencil with the Brooklyn, it's the future. And when it's completely done, then you paint over it.
And that's where all of these extra colors
colors and the drips come about. But the main foundation was beige.
So can I ask you, this image sort of looks a little distorted because of the extra colors that are, why did
And that's
you do
what I
that?
wanted.
What was the purpose in that?
Because that's the future. That's the way I see it. And the things are still up there is the bridge and the robot and the cans. Humans are no longer, so I see her. I'm gonna keep graffiti alive. And murals and street art, let me continue it as a robot. And that's the way I saw it, the future.
Xavier El Mundo believes the transition of graffiti to street art to global phenomenon became trendy and cool for one reason.
Hip-hop. So it started with hip-hop when we first started hip-hop down here and writing graffiti with the DJs. Or the DJs was a graffiti writer and they were playing, or the MCs. That's all artists. We will never separate each other.
Kevin Michael, who also hosted the collage event with Xavier El Mundo and works as a curator, said real estate developers, agents, and landlords play a big role in the commercial value of street art.
If you go to certain neighborhoods like Williamsburg, or even now in Bushwick, where there's a huge street art and graffiti scene, right? Real estate developers and landlords and real estate agents, that has now become a selling point because street art has started to help actually raise rents.
Malika Granville of the Brooklyn Arts Council told me street art has changed the identity of the traditional artist. She mentioned N. Carlos J's event as an example.
People used to think of street art as being taboo and not really being a part of mainstream art. But now you have artists, like you mentioned, and artists that we work with called Brooklyn is the Future. And that's all about street art. It's a mural painting that will go up in Bushwick.
N. Carlos J. believes with the changing demographics, street artists need to become more business savvy.
There'll be some people who will say, well, that's not what it's meant to do. Like it was meant to, just be on the underground. But it's not going to stay in that space. It just isn't going to, it's evolving to a point where you're going to get left behind. So either get in and get down or get left behind.
Local businesses have already commissioned artwork by N. Carlos J. and Xavier El Mundo, and listeners can see photos of the street artists' work at uptownradio.org. Nardos Mesmer, Columbia Radio News.
After months of snowstorms and one of the coldest Februaries in New York City history, spring has finally sprung. We have snowdrops, we have cherry blossoms, and as commentator Alistair Gardner reflects, daffodils.
Daffodils. For most people, daffodils alone are enough to elicit a smile or a comment about how it's so nice that winter's over. But personally, they remind me of lost innocence. After I finished high school, I wanted to backpack around Europe, but I had to earn some money. I did everything from washing dishes in a pub to modelling for life drawing class. But then there was the job that broke me. Professional daffodil picking. I grew up in the rural southwest of England, in a region where daffodils are grown in large batches before being shipped off to stores around the country. At first, it seemed appealing. Waltzing around in a field of daffodils, how hard could it be? On my first day, the magnitude of what I didn't know about daffodils became apparent. First off, when you pick daffodils professionally, you're not picking pretty yellow flowers. You're picking thick green stems that will be packed up and will eventually bloom into daffodils. So much for that glorious field of flowers I'd pictured myself frolicking in. Second, it's hard physical labour. As someone whose greatest challenge had been doing class assignments for chemistry, this was my first experience of what people meant by back-breaking work, or working day in, day out. Daffodil pickers get paid 15 cents for each bunch of 10 daffodils. In order to be making, let's say, the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, you'd have to be picking about a bunch a minute. So you're bent over, hour upon hour, standing up straight only briefly to stash the bunch you just picked. By my second day on the job, I ached all over. Every muscle in my body was in shock. Third, daffodils are poisonous. Even with my gloves, my inexperience left me ravaged by what season pickers refer to as daffodil itch. Angry red rashes covered both of my wrists, and as the days went by, this rash crept up my forearms like ivy. Add to that I was pretty terrible at this job. I never picked enough to make minimum wage, and due to the discomfort of my increasingly stiff back and red itchy arms, I got slower as time went by. I lasted 2 weeks before throwing in the towel. But what I couldn't get over were the career flower pickers. They feed their families and pay their mortgages picking seasonal flowers and produce throughout the year. Watching them race down the field, leaving hundreds of expertly bunched flowers in their wake, was mesmerizing and eye-opening. In many ways, this was my first real job of adult life, and I thought this must be what it's like to work. It made me empathize with my parents, in fact pretty much all the adults I knew. I was confronting the reality of really working for a living, of adult responsibility. I realized this would be true of any job I eventually found myself in. I've since managed to continue evading that responsibility, with even more education. But now I'm about to finish graduate school, and I feel ready to accept adult life, to really learn what day in, day out means. I hope that soon I'll be breaking my back doing something that brings people as much joy as daffodils do, but without the rash.
Alistair Gardner is currently on the hunt for a real adult job, so if anyone is hiring, feel free to contact him, unless you run a daffodil farm.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. There's more to come. Stay with us.
We're back with Uptown Radio. I'm Kimi Von Canal.
And I'm Chava Garari. Uptown Radio is online at uptownradio.org. We're also on air on WBAI FM. Here's what's coming up in the second half of our show.
Americans are spending more on their pets than ever before.
There's a call for better safety standards and working conditions in the city's nail salons.
And a virtual reality machine enhances empathy in humans.
All that and more to come. But first, the news.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Ariana Skybell. Baltimore's chief prosecutor has charged 6 police officers for the death of Freddie Gray, the black man who sustained a fatal spine injury while in police custody. Their crimes include murder and manslaughter. Prosecutor Marilyn Mosby said that
the findings of our comprehensive, independent investigation, coupled with the medical examiner's determination that Mr. Gray's death was a homicide, has led us to believe that we have probable cause to file criminal charges.
Mosby said the incident sickened her. The arrest was illegal and unwarranted in the first place. Closer to home, federal prosecutors have announced indictments in the Washington Bridge lane closure scandal in New Jersey. 3 former colleagues of Governor Chris Christie are accused of using their political influence to undermine a mayor who didn't support Christie's bid for re-election. Gregoire Moll reports.
Governor Chris Christie is still denying that he had any knowledge of what led the bridge lanes to be closed. That's after former Port Authority official David Wilstein pleaded guilty to conspiracy this morning. U.S. District Attorney Paul Fishman said charges had been brought against Wilstein.
Mr. Wilstein, who was then the director of interstate capital projects at the Port Authority, admitted in federal court this morning that he and others orchestrated a deliberate and illegal scheme to reduce the access lanes from 3 to 1.
2 more of Governor Christie's former staffers are now indicted in what is known as Bridgegate, including his former Deputy Chief of Staff, Bridget Kelly, and the former Port Authority Deputy Executive Director, Bill Baroni. The indictment says that both Baroni and Kelly used their political influence to close lanes of George Washington Bridge during rush hour time, creating terrible traffic problems for the city of Fort Lee, New Jersey. David Wilstein said that the motive behind closing the lanes was to retaliate against the mayor of Fort Lee, who had publicly refused to support Chris Christie, who was then seeking re-election as New Jersey governor. Gregoire Moll, Columbia Radio News.
It's been nearly a week since a massive earthquake in Nepal killed more than 6,200 people. Rescue workers continue to look for survivors. The government says it will give the equivalent of $1,000 to the victims' families and $400 for funeral costs. While rubble from the fallen buildings still lines the streets of Kathmandu, slowly residents are packing up their tents and moving indoors, trying to resume daily routines. Saudi-led airstrikes bombed Yemen's capital today, killing at least 20 civilians. This strike came after Yemen's Shiite rebels attacked Saudi border posts last night, sparking fierce fighting that killed 3 Saudi troops and dozens of rebels. The Obama administration is growing increasingly worried over the Saudi-led military intervention. The UN said that at least 550 civilians have been killed since the fighting began in March. It's May Day, an International Workers' Rights Day, and left-wing groups, governments, and trade unions are staging rallies around the world. A few hundred peacefully gathered in Oakland, holding signs that read, "Racism is a disease and Black Lives Matter." In Turkey, demonstrators and police clashed as May Day supporters attempted to defy a ban and march to the iconic Taksim Square. But in Germany, police say the protests are calmer than they were in previous years. The Pentagon survey released today says instances of sexual assault in the military have decreased by 27%, but the number of people reporting crimes has increased. Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter says the report's findings at a press conference today.
Compared to women, men are less likely to report and more likely to experience multiple incidents by multiple offenders.
It's a big weekend for sports, with the Kentucky Derby kicking off tomorrow at 4. The Los Angeles Clippers face the San Antonio Spurs tomorrow night at 8 p.m. in the NBA playoffs game 7. And the historic boxing fight between Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao will start sometime after the basketball game. And don't forget your shades this weekend, partly cloudy tomorrow with a high of 68, and the sun will be out in full force Sunday with a high of 78 degrees. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Ariana Skybell.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. This is Chava Garari.
And I'm Kimi Van Kanel. Nepal is recovering after a 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit nearly a week ago. Homes, hospitals, and historic buildings were destroyed. The death toll has surpassed 6,000 people.
The Nepalese finance minister says the country needs almost $2 billion to rebuild. I spoke with Caroline Anning at the Nepal offices of the nonprofit Save the Children. They're helping with disaster relief in the Nepalese capital of Kathmandu.
Currently, I'm in Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal. It's nighttime here now, so most people are just kind of getting ready to go home and sleeping outside again. So we've been sleeping outside in the car parks of our offices.
What are the most pressing needs right now?
Thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, in fact, have seen their homes totally destroyed. Many people are still sleeping outside just because they're too scared to go back in because of the aftershocks. They're sleeping outside with very little protection, so we need to get them tarpaulins, warm blankets, particularly for children and young babies. And in addition to that, people need food, water, and increasingly what they're going to need as well is sort of sanitation facilities, because otherwise the risk of disease spreading is very high.
So what does the next few days look like for you?
Well, we're doing a couple of things. So our big focus at the moment is to try and get as much aid as possible into the country. There's been a bit of a backlog, and we've got aid planes and trucks flying in from all over the world to replenish our supplies, because we distributed pretty much everything that we had to kind of thousands of people in the early days of the emergency. And then once they come in, we'll be getting those out, as I said, some of the most remote parts of the country. Some of that is taking them out by truck. In some cases, it's so remote where we're looking at getting donkeys, tractors, anything we can do to get them up to those kind of remote mountain passes where people have received very little help so far. And then at the same time, we're also setting up educational spaces, child-friendly spaces, we call them, areas in camps for displaced people where children can kind of play and be safe and be helped to recover from the trauma they've experienced in the earthquake.
What's the atmosphere like?
Nepalese are incredible people, actually. It's like just so positive and friendly and upbeat despite the situation that they're in. I went to a maternity hospital today and then went back to meet some women who had just given birth. Some of them had gone into premature labor because of the earthquake, given birth, and then were going back to sleep outside on the hard ground outside in the rain. You know, despite how awful the conditions are they're living in, they're still kind of positive, welcoming, trying to, give you a Coca-Cola or a fizzy drink because you're a welcome guest, which is amazing. But I think people are getting frustrated, particularly in some of those mountainous areas where they're not being reached.
How does that make you feel?
It never gets any easier seeing people suffering. The scale of the devastation in some places is immense, the personal cost of it to individuals, but also the physical destruction of some incredible historic sites in Nepal. The area I went to today was a displacement camp that had been set up in the grounds of this incredible temple, golden temple that's half crumbled. And so it is tragic and it is shocking. And we know that Nepal is going to need a huge amount of help from, the entire international community to get back on its feet and help its people recover.
How can people who are not in Nepal help?
At this stage, I guess the most helpful thing people can do is to support their preferred organization, and we will then on the ground make sure that we do everything we can to get help to people, whether that's rebuilding schools, rebuilding hospitals. We're opening a pop-up hospital in the next couple of days here, whatever it is.
Thank you so much for talking with us, and thank you so much for your help in Nepal. Caroline Anning's organization Save the Children is providing disaster relief in Nepal.
The city's nail salons are in the spotlight today. Public advocate Letitia James says hazardous working conditions in some nail salons can result in health problems.
Charlotte Gibson reports on a bill that would improve safety standards by adding more inspectors and requiring letter grades.
There are 2,000 salons in New York City, and the state is currently in charge of inspecting them. But there are only 32 inspectors in the whole state. The bill would allow the city to take over inspecting the salons, according to public advocate Letitia James.
People need to know. We need to inform the general public, and most importantly, we need to make sure that employees know about the dangers of some of these chemicals and protect themselves.
Most nail salons use products that have been linked to reproductive harm, respiratory problems, and cancer. The bill would allow the City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene to develop guidelines for salons. Sonam Dolar works for a group called Adhikar, a group that represents Nepali-speaking communities in New York City, many of whom work in nail salons. She hopes the bill will improve conditions for the workers.
I think it's a great step forward. The fact that finally people are talking about how to improve standards at nail salons, because people have been working for years and, they've worked with so many chemicals.
Shrujana Mala is a member of the group and has worked at a salon for 7 years. She says workers like her need respiratory masks.
Lots of people have allergic from nails. When we do the nail file, we have the dust. They makes, our nose is blocked and, bleeding and breathing problem,
The bill would implement a letter grading system for beauty parlors and nail salons like the one used for restaurants. The Independent Budget Office estimates it would cost the city $7.2 million a year to inspect the salons. Uptown Radio approached a dozen nail salons in the city, and none of the managers would agree to an interview. Advocates of the bill say there doesn't appear to be a trade association for nail salons. But the salon owners we spoke to don't seem to be aware that the bill has been introduced. Some nail salon customers say they approve of the measure. Pat Poklempa is a regular customer of a salon on the Upper West Side.
It's like when you go into a restaurant, you look at the ratings that are outside sometimes before you go in. I wouldn't just walk into any place. When you look at the place, especially walking around New York, there's a lot of them, salons. So, there's certain, from looking at it, I wouldn't go in.
Supporters hope that the full council will take it up within the next few months. Charlotte Gibson, Columbia Radio News.
If you want to buy something in New York City, you don't need to go into a store. There are some 10,000 street vendors in the city, and they sell everything from jewelry to hot dogs.
But it's estimated that as many as half of these are operating without licenses or permits. These illegal street vendors face a constant risk of arrests and fines. Alistair Gardner reports some organizations are trying to help street vendors continue selling their items legally.
When you talk about street vending, one of the first things you need to know is that in the late 70s, the City Council put a cap on licenses at just over 850. And the waiting list grew so long that the Department for Consumer Affairs closed it in 1992. That makes for a pretty big black market for renting licenses, and that means that many street vendors operate illegally. On a recent Tuesday night, about 15 street vendors are at an information session in the financial district.
So, welcome everybody. This is our Know Your Rights workshop for the Street Vendor Project.
The Street Vendor Project is a non-profit that advocates on behalf of vendors. Tonight's workshop focuses on helping vendors know their rights. Matthew Shapiro is the Street Vendor Project's attorney, and he has a translator.
Here's one example for the crosswalk. At 10 feet, right? Everyone knows 10 feet from the crosswalk. But sometimes the police think that this is the crosswalk. But it's not true. The crosswalk is here.
Paying attention to details like this is just another thing that Heliodor Viva has to deal with each day. She's originally from Mexico and has been selling merchandise on the street for 8 years. Some of the folks here are first-timers, but Viva has been active with the Street Vendor Project for a few years now.
I sell a little bit of artisanal crafts that I bring from Mexico. I make bracelets, earrings, necklaces, and a little that I buy from stores.
Viva sells her goods without a license, which means she also has to keep an eye out for the police.
That's an instability. It gives you a level of stress, because every day you go out, you never know if in that moment the police are going to come or not. You're always insecure.
Viva's never been arrested, though she has been fined many times. Many illegal food vendors make less than $100 a day, so a $500 fine can be a whole week's wages. If a vendor finds herself with too many tickets, Baz Mareed might be able to help. She's an organizer at the Street Vendor Project. She says they work a bit like a union, defending vendors in court when necessary.
So a lot of times our vendors will be arrested when they're not actually breaking the law. And so when this happens, we've actually sued the city, and through litigation, we've actually made some pretty big wins for our members.
They're also involved in campaigning for policy change, and they've had success in the past couple of years.
We were able to lower the fines that street vendors were getting.
From $1,000 to $500 a pop. Vendors can get fined for anything from being too close to a bus stop or a curb or a crosswalk to not disposing of their trash properly. For the past year, however, the organisation has been trying to tackle the root of this problem.
Big picture things is that we're working on increasing the number of permits and licenses that are available to street vendors.
And they're no longer the only ones fighting for this. A few weeks ago, Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer unveiled a number of proposals to help small businesses, including street vendors.
Part of the notion that we should have more mom-and-pop stores in the city of New York, and vendors are certainly part of it.
One of her favourite examples is the Halal Guys, who went from running a cart to setting up a couple of restaurants.
It's in the context of this support for, the edgy, fabulous food and edgy, fabulous retail that New York City is famous for, and we just don't want to lose it.
But it doesn't look like the city will lose its street vendors anytime soon. Dondi Bubbles is a licensed merchandise vendor, and just across the street from where he sells bubble blowers on Broadway in Spring, he keeps an eye on 2 women who sell food illegally.
I remember last summer when I was vending in Soho, you have these wonderful ladies, they sell mangoes.
Bubbles has seen how tough working life is for these women, but they remain undaunted.
The health department came out and with the police, and they sort of shut them down, and they took their products from them. Lo and behold, the next day they are out with another little cart pushing down the street, and they have their mangoes.
For many street vendors, this is one of the few ways they can make money. Arrests won't stop them, so even if the cap on permits isn't raised, you'll still be able to get mangoes somewhere around the city. Alistair Gardner, Columbia Radio News.
There's a new virtual reality machine. Its goal? To build empathy between people who may have little in common. The inventors say it's another tool for conflict resolution.
Dasha Lisitsina went to try it out for herself.
The machine to be another is a tangle of wires, clunky headgear, and 2 chairs separated by a black curtain. That's what I saw when I walked into a booth at the Tribeca Film Festival, where this machine was showcased. One of the creators, Danish Masood, told me I was about to experience something very strange.
It's just so odd to say, well, we're going to try to give you the illusion of being in someone else's body.
He said my body swap would be a woman called Nicole. She's sitting on the other side of the curtain.
So the way that the machine actually works is that there is a user and a performer.
He gives me what looks like a helmet.
When they don the head-mounted display, they basically see everything from a first-person perspective, but they're in another body.
I sit down and struggle to strap the goggles, headgear, and headphones over my glasses. At first, I see nothing.
Recalibrate.
I can now see the curtain that I saw before, the stool in the corner that was there before too. Then I look down at my body. Oh, I have 2 tattoos on my forearms. I'm moving my hands, but the hands I'm moving don't look like my hands. They're a different skin colour to mine, different size, different texture, but I'm moving them. I look further down. I walked into the booth wearing jeans and sneakers.
I'm wearing a light pink shirt and a polka dot skirt.
I shake my right foot, I shake my left foot, do a little can-can. The bottom of my skirt, or the skirt that I seem to be wearing now, billows and I see ballet shoes appear from underneath.
I'm in someone else's body. It's very bizarre.
At the same time, someone else's voice is coming through the headphones. Nicole, whose body I'm virtually in, is telling her life story. She's an African-American military vet who joined the army for lack of a better option. She describes her life with her young daughter in a poor part of New York before she joined the army.
All we had was dirty mattresses, vacant lots, welfare lines, and public assistance. If I get this job, baby gotta eat, mama gotta provide. I am on my own.
Someone brings out a mirror. This is where stuff gets really weird.
Oh my God, now I see myself sitting opposite me.
What's strange is that I'm looking down and seeing a body with tattoos and a dress that I can move and control. But I'm also looking at the mirror and seeing the body I walked into the experiment with. Myself in denim and space-age headgear. The curtain opens. Ta-da! And I meet Nicole.
Oh my God. That was so freaky, the last bit. It was great.
Yeah, how do you feel?
I'm still pretty confused. How do they do that? I looked at Danish Masood, one of the creators, for an explanation.
What the user sees is connected to a camera that the performer is wearing.
I'm the user, Nicole is the performer. Her camera is tracking my head motions.
And so it's as though the camera is the user's eyes.
She can see what I'm seeing through my goggles. This experience is virtual reality. That's how the machine works. But what's actually going on in my head? Later, I called Mel Slater, an expert in virtual reality at the Event Lab in Barcelona, to find out. I look at my hand, I see my hand, my brain tells me it's my hand. In simple terms, those are the leaps the brain makes.
It's always trying to make a story out of that stimulation. And so if the story it has to make is, okay, this is now my body, it makes it, that's it.
But during my experience of the machine to be another, there was a part of me that always knew that the whole thing wasn't really real. At one point, I noticed the time lag between me moving my hands and me seeing the hands move. What was happening all along is that Nicole, my body swap, could see what I was doing through her goggles and was imitating my movements almost simultaneously.
So this gap between reality and virtual reality is very useful.
It allows you to take that virtual reality experience and apply it to real life. And the real life purpose of this whole shebang is to generate empathy with another human being, one who's maybe in a very different situation to you. One experiment Slater did showed that swapping virtual bodies with someone else dramatically reduced implicit racial bias. Slater says we naturally categorize ourselves into groups, an in-group, which we are part of, and an out-group. We categorize by interests, class, race, all sorts of things. When you put someone in the body of an out-group, it is very powerful.
It's to do with yourself. That actually the out-group is not bad because I'm good, I'm a member of the out-group.
Slater's test is one of the things that inspired Danish Masood to start the Machine to Be Another project, a mixture of virtual reality and interactive storytelling.
When you recognize yourself in the story that I'm telling you, maybe we feel more connected.
Empathy is very difficult to measure and quantify. But what I can say is that the Machine to Be Another gave me a glimpse into what it might be like to be someone else, if momentarily. Dasha Lisitsina, Columbia Radio News.
New Yorkers are crazy about their dogs, and it's estimated that American spending on pets has nearly doubled in the last 10 years. Now, the current rate is $60 billion a year.
Doggy lifestyles run the gamut in the city. Some are homeless and some have rooms bigger than human apartments. Tyler Daniels reports on what is changing in the current pet economy.
If you were looking for a pet last weekend, it was one-stop shopping at the Altman Building on West 18th Street. Best Friends Animal Rescue was holding its inaugural Pet Super Adoption for Manhattan. The space has seen its fair share of weddings and black ties, but Friday to Sunday it had tarp on its floors and rows of crates that housed 600 dogs and cats, all looking for a home. In one corner, Judah Batista, a director of the event, makes sure potential pet parents know there's a big discount today.
We have a promotion that's running for people that know the secret code, which is Save Them All, and if they say Save Them All, we'll subsidize the adoption for them.
Stuffing is a pit bull mix. She stands out sporting a pink tutu and can hardly contain her excitement when anyone walks by. If you're an animal lover, cuteness abounds. But Christina Howley, the director of the Bark Rescue Group, wants potential owners to know that today is about more than just loving your dog.
There's a huge financial responsibility as well as a personal responsibility.
Her group asks for a $200 to $300 donation to adopt the dog.
If a family can't afford that, then that's kind of a red flag for us. We can kind of vet out who, can financially afford the dog.
Carmen O'Connor loves dogs. She already has 2 at home, and she volunteers with one of the groups here at the rescue event. But after looking at one of the dogs all weekend, she couldn't hold back any longer.
And I saw her and I wanted to add her to the family.
She's completed all the paperwork, and to celebrate, a bell rings, indicating another pooch has found his forever home. And because O'Connor already owns dogs, she won't be surprised by any of the costs.
Just like anything, you just give it the healthy foods and give it walks and take care of it and groom it. But overall, it's not a daunting task.
In the space of a few short minutes, O'Connor's collie has gone from one of hundreds looking for a home to now having a first and last name. And this is Sadie O'Connor. It's this family-like connection to dogs that experts say is driving the pet economy.
We see them more as a member of the family, so we are putting those financial dollars towards them like we are our kids.
That's Jamie Baxter of the American Pet Products Association.
We're increasing the vet visits, and we are, more aware of the food that we're giving them.
Since 2003, American pet spending has doubled from $30 to $60 billion annually, which is twice the state budget of New Jersey. And when it comes to pampering and spending, New York knows how to do it right. Take, for example, this dog hotel on West 27th Street.
D Pet Hotels Chelsea, which is the most luxurious dog hotel here in New York City.
Co-founder Carrie Brown shows me around. On the ground floor of the Chelsea building is a doggy daycare. It's got a lobby area, and behind large glass windows are a large play area where roughly 25 dogs are running around. I then go down to the basement, aka the hotel.
When dogs board with us, they never have to stay in a cage or a kennel. They get their very own little suites.
The hotel has 3 tiers of suites, ranging from $80 for a basic crash pad to $200 a night for an Uber suite.
We have a certain clientele that only uses the Uber suite.
As we come around the corner in the basement, we meet one of the guests. Yogi greets us as we walk by her elite room.
Yo, do you relax? You're okay.
Brown calms her guest, though we did walk into her room unannounced.
It's really nicer than my bedroom at home. It's got a full-size bed, 42-inch flat-screen TV, really all the comforts of home.
As we leave, Yogi continues watching Scooby-Doo and the Pirates on her flat-screen TV. Brown is building off the idea that New Yorkers love their dogs and want them to be spoiled. That's what attracted customer Nancy, who didn't want to give her last name. She's dropped off her dog, Oscar, and she's scanning the play area before she departs.
Well, Oscar used to live a few blocks down. Oh, there he is.
She stands in the hotel lobby with her suitcase, looking through the glass windows. Nancy's opting for a standard hotel room, as Oscar is more of a low-key hotel guest, just looking for a place to crash.
Mostly he just likes the socialization. He loves it here. I mean, look at him. He's already playing with all the dogs. It's just a good place.
The American Pet Products Association projects another 4% growth in spending next year, which could mean more treats, hotel visits, and better food for Oscar and his friends. Tyler Daniels, Columbia Radio News.
Almost 8 million people in the U.S. are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and the rates are highest among military veterans.
There are good treatments for PTSD. The Department of Veterans Affairs funds evidence-based interventions like talk therapy and medication. But these treatments don't work for everyone.
A new bill would evaluate how effective alternative therapies are in treating PTSD. That includes horse therapy. Miriam Sitz visited the Bronx Equestrian Center and reports on a new horse therapy program for veterans.
Though there's not as much research into alternative therapies for PTSD, there's plenty of anecdotal support for things like equine-assisted therapy. Take Chris Jones. He didn't have any experience with horses until several years after serving in South Korea, California, and Iraq.
I'm a city kid, so I didn't grow up around horses. I didn't think I was scared, but I was looking to the horse like, are you cool? I'm gonna be cool as long as you cool. You know, that's what was going on.
Around the time he started his master's degree last fall, he got a fellowship to work with Gallop NYC, a nonprofit that gives riding lessons and other therapeutic horse activities to New Yorkers with disabilities, and to veterans. Jones helped with outreach and also participated in one of their first horse programs specifically for vets. He found that working with horses made him more conscious of his own behavior.
You have to be aware of self. The horse can pick up on when you're trying to present yourself a certain way, but internally there's angst or whatever's going on. The horse really does pick up on that. What I saw was guys being aware of their feelings more, or being able to express their feelings more.
Jones says it was relaxing, calming even, and being around other vets felt instantly comfortable and familiar. But he doesn't think the program is a cure-all.
I'm definitely not going to say like it can completely replace talk therapy or anything like that, because we're not claiming to be doctors, but we're just saying that it's something about the animal people respond to.
And more vets are responding. One morning this week, 3 veterans and twice as many volunteers gather around a table inside a barn at the Bronx Equestrian Center. Susie Marquardt is a certified instructor with Gallop NYC. She explains to the men why they're here.
Working with horses is a really healing thing. You can learn a lot about yourself by working with a horse, because this is the deal with horses, which y'all may be able to identify with. They're prey animals, so they get hunted. They have to be always vigilant. You probably know what that feels like, right?
The men, 2 veterans of Vietnam and 1 who served in the 80s, seem to agree. The 6-week curriculum teaches skills like grooming and eventually riding the horses. But the veterans will also learn to interact with the animals.
There's a lot of interaction that goes on while you're doing that with the horse that may give you some ideas about how you relate to other people, for example.
A Marine Corps vet chimes in.
Horses have more sense than people, believe it or not. You learn a lot about yourself from horses.
Oh, cool. So you have some experience.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Cool.
He worked with horses as a young man, before he went to Vietnam and became one of what he calls the walking dead.
With the walking dead in Vietnam. You go out 600 strong every morning, you get 40 coming back in. That was every day.
Yeah.
Because vets bring those kind of experiences with them, Marquardt says the organization avoids using the word therapy to describe the program.
We call it a leadership program because I think vets take to that better. They don't want to be coming to therapy. And we don't do therapy. We teach them horsemanship, which happens to be therapeutic.
Come on, Kona. Pick your head up. Go.
For the next 2 hours, they work with the horses down in the arena, brushing them, leading them on walks around the ring. Eugene Graves served in the Army here in the U.S. for 3 years.
See, I have depression. I suffer from depression and anxiety, but I think this is going to help me out a lot.
Have you ever worked with horses before?
No, and I always wanted to. Now I got the opportunity.
The Army and all the services have a long history of working with animals. Think of the cavalry, that these soldiers riding horseback across the plains.
Dr. Cam Ritchie retired from the Army after 28 years as a psychiatrist. She's a PTSD specialist, now in private practice in Washington, D.C. And she studied all kinds of treatments, including equine-assisted therapy. Ritchie explains,
there is a lot of connections, and in many cases in the past, the soldier absolutely depended on their horse for their life.
She warns that alternative therapies don't replace traditional treatments.
I do not recommend that people throw out their pills and go and buy a horse.
But there is evidence that they work.
We have a lot of accounts from veterans and other people with post-traumatic stress disorder describing marked reduction of symptoms.
Problem is, there's just not enough evidence, especially compared to more traditional therapies.
A challenge is that most research studies are funded by pharmaceutical companies who do not have a vested interest in exploring the positive benefits of horses or of dogs.
And because there hasn't been much research, it's more difficult for anyone to get access.
Usually insurance companies are only going to pay for treatments that are, quote, evidence-based.
The VA and private insurers will pay for equine-assisted therapy when it's part of a physical, occupational, or speech therapy treatment plan. Roxanne Chess-Pearson is a New York-based occupational therapist trained in hippotherapy, a type of specialized equine therapy. The horse's movement, she says, helps to develop sensory and motor skills in patients.
So as an occupational therapist, instead of using things in a gym or out in the community, I'm using the horse and the horse area around the barn.
And when horses are used in this way, as a living, breathing therapeutic tool, therapists can code and bill for that.
Because it's OT, PT, and speech, families do find that they can be reimbursed oftentimes through insurance.
Although that kind of therapy isn't what Gallup NYC does, their therapeutic horsemanship program is free for veterans. But as a nonprofit organization, there's a limit to how many people they can help. A bill headed for Congress now, the COVER Act, would examine the potential benefits that alternative treatments, including horse therapy, provide. Eventually, bolstered by the backing of enough research and evidence, it could become available to all veterans. Miriam Sitz, Columbia Radio News.
Visit uptownradio.org to watch a short video of the veterans you just heard working with horses this week at the Bronx Equestrian Center.
From Imelda Marcos to Carrie Bradshaw, women all over the world seem to have a dubious obsession with shoes. Commentator Hannah Klingberg is one of the worst.
There's this gorgeous pair of pumps I've had my eye on for months. They're bright red suede leather with a 3.5-inch heel, and they're really expensive. But I want them. I love them because I love shoes. My first love was a pair of pale yellow lace-up sneakers. I was 3 years old, and they were the coolest shoes ever. The right one had this little pocket on the side, just large enough for a money. I didn't understand coins and bills and things. I just knew that if I got hold of a money, I would keep it in my shoe. But that day never came, because my precious yellow sneakers were suddenly shorter than my feet. I waved a teary-eyed goodbye to them as my mom unceremoniously shoved them in the evil giveaway bag. My first love, but not my last. As a teenager, I hated buying clothes. Back then, H&M was all the rage, and I remember going to the mall with my friends for the launch of its youth collection. I was 14, both in age and in size. But the collection, appropriately named Divided, capped at size 12. So there I was, too fat for fashion. They should put that on a t-shirt. And so I turned to shoes, because the shoes always fit. Actually, that's a size 14 lie. The shoes would have fit if I'd bought the right ones. But somehow, I always end up with shoes half a size too small. Like the boots I bought on a 10th grade school trip. Man, let's just say they were the epitome of Y2K fashion. Long, black, and shiny with a clunky 2-inch heel and made from a material so synthetic I'm lucky they didn't spontaneously combust. But I loved them. I wore those boots with pride for about 5 minutes and then with excruciating agony for the next 5 hours. I was at a garden party. My friends played bocce. I sat on a bench. My friends danced around. I sat on a bench. But in the end, I had to get up, and with no buses around and no money for a cab, I walked the 1 mile home in my pantyhose. Blisters 1, grace 0. You'd think I would have learnt my lesson after that, but I still managed to buy shoes that are half a size too small. Luckily, I've lost some weight and my feet have actually shrunk. In fact, I'm a size 12 now. And the other day I went to H&M and tried on a dress from their youth collection. And it fit. But I didn't buy it. I couldn't. Because I just spent a big money on a pair of bright red suede leather pumps.
Hannah Klingberg says her long, black, uncomfortable boots ended up in a not-so-evil giveaway bag.
That does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. Thanks for listening.
Hannah Klingberg led the troops as executive producer this week. Senior producer Cassandra Basler fine-tuned our sound.
Paula Lem directed the studio battalion with Nardos Mesmer and Tyler Daniels.
Senior editor Anjali Sastry and Teresa Avila whipped our scripts into shape.
Ariel Richin was our 5-star producer.
Alistair Gardner and Dasha Lisitsina got us online and into the 21st century.
Special thanks to our professors, John Dingus, Carrie Donahue, Rick Carr, and Daniela Larcon. I'm Chava Garari.
And I'm Kimi Von Kannel. Uptown Radio is live on Fridays at 4 p.m. and on WBAI Mondays at 5 a.m. You can download our podcast and find us online at uptownradio.org.